I didn't leave my fortune to my son. I left it to the woman he paid to betray me. Shocking? Yes. But when your own child tries to have you declared insane just to steal what's yours, you learn where true loyalty lies. She was the woman who made my tea for 20 years. When she confessed she had been spying on me for my own son, I thought my heart would stop right there. For 2 decades, every smile had carried a secret price. If you're listening now, subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. Keep watching because what happened next is a lesson in betrayal, justice, and the strange shape loyalty can take. I never thought I'd live long enough to make a decision that would shock my entire family, but here I am. At 76 years old, I signed my will and placed it neatly in the lawyer's hands, and when the day comes, people will gasp when they learn I left everything. My mansion, my estates, even my jewelry, to my housekeeper of 20 years. Not my son, not his polished wife with her glassy smile, not the grandchildren who only visit if there's a gift waiting on the dining table. No. I chose the woman who ironed my sheets, polished my silver, and heard the cracks in my voice before anyone else noticed. And I know what you're thinking. Why would any woman choose her servant over her blood? The answer isn't simple. But it begins on a stormy night when the woman I trusted most sat trembling in my kitchen and broke my heart. For years Maria had been my shadow. She came into my life when I was already widowed, when the silence of this house felt like a punishment rather than a comfort. She filled it with the quiet rhythm of loyalty, the sound of floors being scrubbed, fresh bread baked on Sunday mornings, my medicine placed neatly on the nightstand before I even asked. If there was anyone in the world I could say never left my side, it was her. Sometimes I even told her that she was more reliable than my own son, David. I laughed when I said it, but deep down I meant it. I thought she was the proof that loyalty could exist outside the blood that so often poisons us. That's why her confession cut so deep. That night, rain pounded the windows like impatient fists, and thunder shook the glass cabinets in my dining room. I'd been sitting with a cup of tea when I noticed her standing in the doorway, wringing her hands the way she only did when something was eating her alive. I asked her to sit, but instead she sank to her knees in front of me, tears spilling down her face, and begged me to forgive her before she even said a word. I remember the way my stomach sank. Maria had been my right hand for 2 decades. What could possibly have broken her so completely? And then the truth spilled out. For years she said she had been reporting everything about me to David. My son, my only child. He had paid her to keep him updated. What medicine I was taking, what I ate for dinner, even whether I seemed lucid or confused. At first she said it had been harmless details. He told her it was so he could stay close to me, so he could watch over me even when he was busy. But slowly his requests had grown darker. He wanted her to misplace my belongings so I'd look forgetful. He wanted her to delay giving me my medication or double a dose to make me appear weak. He was laying the groundwork for something sinister, and Maria had been his accomplice. I wish I could say I didn't believe her, that I laughed at the absurdity of it. But the truth is, some part of me had already noticed. The missing glasses, the strange fog in my head after certain pills, the way David always seemed to know what kind of day I was having even when I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. The puzzle pieces had been scattered around me all along, and Maria's confession simply snapped them into place. Still, hearing it broke me. Imagine learning that the one person you trusted most was betraying you with every smile, every gesture of care. I sat frozen as her words washed over me. She told me she couldn't carry the guilt anymore. That the thought of helping my son destroy me had made her sick. That she would rather face my wrath than continue the lie. And there she was, shaking, crying, begging a 76-year-old woman to forgive what might never be forgivable. That night, I stared at her through the candlelight, and my mind wrestled with 2 truths. She had betrayed me, and yet she was also the only one honest enough to finally tell me the danger I was in. Betrayal and loyalty twisted together in one trembling figure at my feet. Do you understand the kind of heartbreak that carries? To know that the woman who folded your laundry also folded herself into your son's schemes? And yet, in that moment, I realized that if she hadn't confessed, I might never have known what was being planned for me. I lay awake for hours after she went to bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rattle the house like it was demanding answers I didn't have. My son. My flesh and blood. He wanted me erased, not with violence that would leave blood on his hands, but with a slow erosion of my mind, until a judge or a lawyer declared me unfit to manage my own affairs. And he had used the one woman I trusted most to do it. If you're listening now, you might be wondering, why, after such a confession, would I still choose to leave my fortune to her? Why reward betrayal at all? That, my dear, is where the story begins. Because loyalty is not measured by the years someone stands beside you without flaw. It is measured by the moment they choose to stand beside you when it costs them everything. Maria broke my trust, yes. But on that stormy night she also gave me back my life. And what I did with it will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and inheritance. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from, because I promise you, this story only gets darker from here. There are betrayals in life you can prepare yourself for. Friends who drift away, colleagues who turn envious, neighbors who speak kindly to your face but gossip behind your back. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize your own child has been scheming against you. Blood is supposed to mean safety, isn't it? Supposed to mean that no matter what storms the world throws at you, there will be one anchor in the chaos. My entire life I told myself that was what David was for me. My anchor. My reason. My only child. And now, as Maria's confession echoed in my mind, all I could see was the truth I had avoided for too long. David was never my anchor. He was the weight pulling me under. I began to retrace the years with a clarity that only betrayal can bring. David had always been entitled. As a boy, he demanded more toys than I could carry from the store, and as a teenager he treated my money like it grew on trees planted just for him. Thought it was youth. I thought it was arrogance that time would smooth down like a rough stone in the river. When he dropped out of his first university, I told myself he needed time to find his path. When he wrecked the car his father left him, I told myself boys make mistakes. When he married Vanessa, who seemed to see me as little more than a purse with pearls attached, I told myself love often chooses poorly in its first attempt. I excused, I explained, I forgave. Over and over. But now I could no longer fool myself. This wasn't youthful arrogance, and it wasn't a mistake. It was calculation. Cold, deliberate calculation. My son wanted me erased not because he hated me. Oh no, that would almost have been easier. But because to him I was nothing more than a locked vault standing between him and his fortune. The thought of it hollowed me out. I had carried him inside me, given him everything, and in return he wanted to reduce me to a trembling figure in a courtroom, stripped of dignity, declared insane while he signed his name on all I had built. Do you know what it feels like when love curdles into disappointment so sharp it tastes like metal in your mouth? I sat there in my chair staring at the flickering shadows on the wall, and it hit me. Disappointment is heavier than anger. Anger is fire. It burns hot, it consumes, but it eventually dies out. Disappointment? That's stone. It settles deep in your chest, pressing down with a weight that never really lifts. And that night I felt that stone settle. But here is what my son miscalculated. He thought disappointment would break me. He thought that being betrayed by my only child would leave me too weak to fight. He thought age had turned me into glass, ready to shatter at the slightest blow. What he did not see, what he never bothered to notice, is that age does not always weaken you. Sometimes it distills you. It burns away the softness, the excuses, the endless second chances until only steel remains. That night I made a vow. If my son wanted to see me as nothing more than a stumbling old woman, then let him. Let him underestimate me. Let him believe his plan was as good as finished. Because in his arrogance he would never see me watching, never suspect me listening, never imagine me preparing a plan of my own. He had chosen blood against blood, and I would show him that even a mother, when pushed too far, could fight with a ferocity he had never imagined. It is strange, isn't it, how betrayal can transform you? Just days earlier I had been feeling frail, uncertain, almost resigned to the creeping weakness of age. I accepted help without question, I accepted concern without suspicion, and I accepted the slow diminishing of my independence as though it were inevitable. But now, with the sting of David's plan burning in my chest, I felt sharper, clearer, almost alive again. They wanted me to believe I was losing my mind. In reality, my mind had never been more awake. I thought of the little details Maria confessed. Misplaced objects, medicine tampered with, subtle manipulations designed to make me look unsteady. It was clever, I'll admit that. Clever enough that perhaps the courts would have believed it if I hadn't learned the truth in time. But cleverness without conscience is a fragile weapon. And now that I knew what to look for, I would turn every trick, every deceit into ammunition against him. As I sat there, forming the edges of a plan in my mind, I realized something else. My life had been defined for so long by roles handed to me: wife, mother, widow. I had poured myself into them without hesitation because that was what was expected. But now, for the first time in decades, I was no longer defined by anyone else. Not by my late husband's memory, not by society's expectations of how a widow should fade quietly into the background, and certainly not by a son who saw me as a stumbling obstacle. No. For the first time, I was simply Eleanor. A strategist. A woman with her back against the wall and her eyes wide open. So I steeled myself. I told the empty house, with its storm-beaten windows and its silent rooms, that I would not crumble. Blood had turned against blood, yes. But blood alone does not define family, and betrayal does not define me. If David wanted to play the part of the calculating son, then I would play mine. The mother who stopped pretending she was powerless. And when the time came, he would see just how dangerous it was to underestimate the woman who gave him life. Forgiveness is not weakness. People mistake it for softness, for naivety, but real forgiveness is a choice sharpened by wisdom. That night, when Maria sobbed at my feet and confessed the years of spying, I could have cast her out, slammed the door, and left her shivering in the storm. And truth be told, for a fleeting moment I wanted to. My heart was bruised by her betrayal. Every memory of her tending to me when I was ill, cooking my favorite meals, humming in the kitchen, it all twisted into doubt. Was any of it real, or had it all been a performance for her real employer, my own son? But as I looked at her trembling hands and her eyes wet with shame, I recognized something genuine. Regret. Perhaps even redemption. She had come clean, knowing I could ruin her, knowing she had no guarantee of mercy. And there, in her weakness, I saw an opportunity. I forgave her, yes, but not without conditions. My forgiveness would not be a gift, but a contract. If she truly wanted to make amends, she would help me gather proof. She would turn her role as spy into one of double agent. The next morning I called my lawyer. Not the slick firm David occasionally used to scare off debt collectors, but my own. An old friend, someone who had handled my estate for decades and knew I was neither fragile nor foolish. His voice carried no surprise when I explained what Maria had confessed. In fact, there was a heaviness to it, as though he had half expected such a call. "I've seen sons do worse for less," he said quietly, before promising to handle everything with the utmost discretion. Within a week he had investigators walking through the mansion, disguised as repairmen and delivery men, tucking cameras into corners, microphones into vents, and a system for documenting every pill I was supposed to take. It was strange watching my home transform. For decades, this mansion had been my refuge. High ceilings, velvet drapes, the familiar creak of the staircase where David once slid down on his belly laughing. Now it became something else entirely, a stage. Every room, every corridor, every cabinet held eyes and ears. The library where David once pretended to study but actually scribbled childish doodles was now a listening post. The kitchen, where Maria had baked birthday cakes, now held a camera trained directly on the medicine drawer. Even my bedroom, the most private of places, was wired to capture every whispered word. I had given up privacy, but in exchange I had gained power. Maria was nervous at first. Her hands shook when she took the phone calls from David. She feared slipping, feared he would detect the new hesitancy in her voice. But I reminded her. Fear is also a kind of fuel. Use it, I told her. Remember why you're doing this. Each time she walked back into the room after speaking with him, her face pale, I took her hand and said, "You're not alone now." And slowly she steadied. Slowly she became less the weeping betrayer and more my unlikely accomplice. The recordings began to pile up, each one more damning than the last. David's voice, sharp with impatience. "She's still too coherent. Increase the confusion. Tell the doctor she misplaced her medication. Maria's strained responses, but she noticed the last change. She might grow suspicious. His reply, chilling in its casual cruelty, she's old. She'll doubt herself before she doubts us. Another night, the microphone in the parlor caught him instructing her to hide small objects. Move her jewelry. Scatter her papers. Make it look like she can't keep track of anything anymore. When the lawyers come, she needs to seem unfit. His laugh was low, ugly. By the time we're through, the courts will beg me to take control. Each recording was a blade, cutting away the last threads of denial I might have had about my son. Yet strangely, as the evidence grew, so did my sense of strength. The house that had once felt like it was closing in on me now expanded into possibility. Every corner was no longer a threat, but a witness. Every whisper of betrayal became a line in the story I would one day tell a judge, a jury, perhaps even the world. Still, the risk was constant. There were moments when Maria faltered, when her eyes flickered with too much fear, and I wondered if she might break under the weight of her guilt. There were times David showed up unannounced, prowling through the rooms, glancing at me with a mixture of condescension and calculation, and I feared he might notice the tiny lens hidden in the bookcase or the slight hum of the recorder in the lamp. Each of those moments stretched my heartbeat into a drum inside my ears. But then he would leave, smug in his certainty that I was defenseless, and I would exhale knowing that his arrogance remained my greatest weapon. Empowerment comes in strange forms. For me, it came through betrayal. It came through microphones tucked into chandeliers and cameras blinking unseen in corners. It came through watching my son dig his own grave with every recorded word. I had once thought myself prey, cornered by those younger and stronger than me. But as the weeks unfolded, I realized I had become something else entirely. I was no longer the frail widow waiting for kindness or cruelty. I was the architect of a trap. And though the betrayal still stung, though my heart still ached at the thought that my son saw me only as a bank account in pearls, I found a strange comfort in this new role. Maria's guilt was no longer just her burden. It was a bridge between us. Together we were building something stronger than the lies David fed us. Together we were weaving a net that he would one day stumble into, blind with greed. Every night I sat in my armchair looking around at my wired home and whispered to myself, "Let him come. Let him think he's winning." Because soon enough my mansion would no longer be his playground. It would be his undoing. The morning he arrived, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. My son walked into my home as though he already owned it, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor, his smile smug and rehearsed. Flanking him were two lawyers in sharp suits and a doctor carrying a clipboard. They looked at me not as a woman, not even as a mother, but as a case file waiting to be closed. My son's hand brushed the banister as he entered the parlor, and I caught the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. This was his stage, or so he thought. I let them see what they wanted to see. I sat in my armchair, a blanket across my lap, hands folded loosely as though too weak to hold myself upright. I murmured pleasantries, nodded vaguely, even let my eyes drift as if I were tired of following the conversation. Inside, though, every nerve in me was taut, waiting for the precise second when their arrogance would turn to ash. The questioning began innocuously enough. "Mrs. Whitfield," one of the lawyers said smoothly, "do you recall what day it is today?" I smiled faintly, then frowned as if unsure. Another asked if I'd misplaced important documents recently, hinting at confusion. The doctor scribbled in silence, his pen scratching against the paper, each sound meant to tally up my supposed decline. Through it all, my son watched me with a predator's patience, nodding at their questions, urging them on. He expected hesitation, stammering, the fumbling of a mind slipping away. What he didn't expect was the steel beneath my frailty. The accusations grew sharper, more pointed. They spoke of misplaced jewelry, of medications gone awry, of bills unpaid. "She's simply not capable of managing such a large estate anymore," one lawyer concluded, with a mockery of sympathy dripping from his tone. My son folded his hands together, leaned back in his chair and gave a performance of his own. Sorrow in his eyes, a trembling sigh as if this charade weighed heavily on him. "It's for her own good," he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. That was my cue. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my gaze from my folded hands and locked eyes with him. For the first time in years he faltered. Something in my stare must have reminded him of the mother who had once scolded him, who had once seen through every childish lie. Without a word, I turned my head toward my lawyer, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, patient as a watchman. With the smallest nod I gave him permission. The room changed in an instant. My lawyer pressed a button and suddenly the air was filled with a voice everyone in that room knew well. My son's. Only this time his words were not rehearsed, not painted with false grief. His voice spilled out sharp and merciless. She's still too coherent. Increase the confusion. Tell the doctor she misplaced her medication. The lawyers froze. The doctor's pen halted mid-scratch. My son's eyes widened and color drained from his face as his own words boomed from the small recorder on the table. Before he could speak, another clip played. His voice again, laughing this time. Move her jewelry. Scatter her papers. Make it look like she can't keep track of anything anymore. By the time we're through, the courts will beg me to take control. Marta's voice followed, trembling in response, asking if it was too dangerous. And then his reply, casual and cold. She's old. She'll doubt herself before she doubts us. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My son's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air on dry land. His lawyers looked at one another, horror dawning as they realized they had been dragged into a farce built on lies. The doctor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his clipboard now useless in his lap. I let the silence stretch. Let them squirm in it. Finally I spoke, my voice calm and steady, carrying every ounce of authority I had reclaimed. You came here today expecting a woman too broken to defend herself. You brought strangers into my home to declare me unfit, to strip me of dignity and power. But tell me, how unfit does this sound? I gestured again and the recordings continued. Maria's confessions. The late-night calls. Every bribe, every threat, every instruction meticulously documented. The trap I had built now closed with a satisfying snap. My son's face twisted, first in disbelief, then in fury. He leapt to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is manipulation. She's setting me up, he shouted, but the evidence drowned his protest. His voice, his own words, hung in the air heavier than any accusation I could have spoken. For years I had doubted myself. For years, I had wondered if perhaps I had been too harsh, too distant, too blind to the man my son had become. But in that moment, with his lies unraveling around him, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: vindication. The weight of suspicion that had sat on my chest for so long finally lifted, replaced by the clean burn of justice. The room was no longer his stage. It was mine. For a fleeting second he looked at me, perhaps hoping I might waver, that some scrap of maternal instinct would rescue him from the net closing around his ankles. But I had nothing left to give him. Not pity, not rescue, not even anger. Only truth. The housekeeper, poor Maria, sat wringing her hands, tears streaking down her face. I had seen guilt eat at her for weeks, but now the weight became unbearable. She lifted her head, her voice trembling but clear enough for every lawyer and doctor in the room to hear. No, she said, shaking her head firmly. I did what you asked me to do. Every pill I misplaced, every item I hid, it was on your orders. You paid me, you pressured me, you told me if I didn't you'd ruin me. And I believed you. I'm ashamed, but I can't let you lie your way out of this. Her confession was not a shield for herself. It was a surrender. And in that surrender she shattered the last defense my son had. The lawyers who had marched into my home so confidently minutes before now shifted uneasily in their seats. One cleared his throat and mumbled something about needing to reassess representation. The other avoided my gaze altogether, already retreating in his mind from a case that had turned into a career-ending spectacle. Even the doctor who had sat ready to diagnose me as incompetent moments ago now looked at my son with disgust, his clipboard abandoned, his authority stolen by undeniable truth. My son's voice cracked with rage. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. Everything you own, everything in this house, it's mine by right. You're old, you're weak, you wouldn't even last without me. His words meant to wound me fell flat. They revealed more than he understood. Entitlement laid bare, greed dripping from every syllable. It was not the cry of a son fighting for justice. It was the tantrum of a child furious that the world would no longer bend to his will. And still I said nothing. I didn't need to. My silence spoke more loudly than his shouting. I simply looked at him, my gaze steady, unwavering, the same gaze that once froze him in place when he was a boy caught stealing sweets from the pantry. But now that look carried no love beneath it, no promise of forgiveness after punishment. It was colder, final. The gaze of a woman who had endured betrayal and decided she would never again lower her eyes in shame. The authorities had been waiting, quietly observing from the background, ready to step in when the time came. One officer moved forward, his voice calm but authoritative as he informed my son that formal proceedings for fraud and elder abuse were being initiated immediately. Another officer approached Maria gently, noting her cooperation and ensuring her statement was recorded in full. My son's protests filled the room, a chorus of denial, anger, and desperation. But no one listened anymore. His words carried no weight, no authority, only the hollow ring of a man exposed. As the officers guided him toward the door, his face twisted in disbelief. He turned back to me, searching my eyes for weakness. "Mother, you can't let them do this. You raised me. I'm your blood. You owe me everything I have." But I didn't flinch. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, the storm in him crashing against the immovable calm in me. For the first time, I realized how powerless his anger truly was when I refused to bend beneath it. Maria sobbed quietly beside me, whispering apologies over and over, but I placed a hand lightly on hers. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was already written in my decision to let her help me build the trap. Her guilt had turned her into an ally, and unlike my son, she had chosen truth over self-preservation in the end. The lawyers gathered their papers with haste, eager to distance themselves from the spectacle. The doctor slipped out silently, no longer part of the play. And in the hollow quiet that followed, I felt a shift within me. For years, I had been shrinking under the weight of suspicion and fear, doubting myself against whispers I couldn't prove. Now, watching my son's arrogance collapse into disgrace, I felt something else entirely: justice. It wasn't triumphant joy. It wasn't relief. It was heavier, deeper. Like a wound stitched closed after years of bleeding. Pain still lingered, but the healing had finally begun. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a brief moment, listening to the echoes of his protests fading down the hall. Betrayal had burned itself into justice. Lies had been dragged into light. And for the first time in a very long time I could breathe without doubt pressing down on my chest. But even in that moment of catharsis, another thought crept in, quiet and insistent. What would I do with what remained? Wealth poisoned by greed was no blessing. It was a curse. And now that the poison had been cut out, I knew I had a choice to make. My son believed inheritance was his birthright. But birthright meant nothing when blood itself turned treacherous. And so, as he was led away and Maria sat trembling beside me, I already knew. My fortune would not die with me. It would be cleansed, divided, transformed. Because survival wasn't enough anymore. Legacy demanded more than blood. Months slipped by after the storm that tore my family apart, though time itself felt altered. Days carried both a strange lightness and a deep, quiet ache. My son's case dragged through the courts. Headlines splashing his disgrace across newspapers and screens. Wealthy heir accused of elder abuse. Son tried to declare own mother insane. His name, once tethered to mine, now stood alone in shame. Strangers whispered about him in grocery stores, colleagues cut ties and friends disappeared. Every appearance in court was another nail sealing the coffin of the reputation he had once held so proudly. I attended only one hearing in person. He wouldn't look at me at first, but when his eyes finally flickered toward mine, I saw no recognition. Just resentment. The kind of resentment that festers when someone believes the world owed them everything and cannot forgive it for refusing. He did not see a mother sitting there. He saw the obstacle he had failed to destroy. That was the moment I stopped hoping for reconciliation. Some wounds heal, but others, born of greed, deceit, and betrayal, wrought too deeply to ever close. Maria meanwhile never left my side. Her guilt was raw, unvarnished, but so was her devotion in the aftermath. She brewed my tea each morning, her hands steady now, no longer carrying the weight of deceit. She walked with me through the garden, sometimes in silence, sometimes pouring out apologies until I hushed her with a single glance. Trust, once broken, cannot be glued back together seamlessly. It carries cracks, scars. But cracks also let light through. And in her loyalty, fractured then remade, I found something unexpected. Proof that redemption, unlike entitlement, must be earned. When the verdict finally came, it was heavy. Fraud. Conspiracy. Attempted elder abuse. The judge spoke sternly, stripping him of any rights to my estate and making clear that his actions had not only betrayed a mother but endangered the dignity of countless elders whose stories too often go unheard. My son's face tightened, his arrogance replaced by something hollow. He wanted to blame, to scream, to thrash, but all he could do was stand there, exposed as justice delivered what he had so long believed he controlled. I did not cry. I did not cheer. I simply sat still, letting the words settle like stones in a pond, rippling out into the rest of my life. Afterward, my lawyer asked the inevitable question. What next? My estate was vast, accumulated over decades of work, investments, and careful stewardship. My son was gone from the equation, severed by his own hand. But wealth poisoned by greed cannot simply sit idle. It had to be cleansed, redirected, given meaning beyond the bitter soil from which this betrayal had grown. So I did what no one expected, not even Maria. I rewrote my will. Half of my estate went to causes close to my heart. A trust for elderly women who, like me, had faced betrayal from within their own families. Too often those stories were silenced, dismissed, or left to rot in shadows. I wanted my wealth to amplify them, to shield others from the loneliness and danger I had endured. The other half I left to Maria. Yes, the very woman who had once betrayed me. Gasps echoed in the lawyer's office when I signed the papers. But my decision was not madness, it was clarity. My son had shown me what blood could become when spoiled by greed. Maria had shown me what loyalty could look like when broken, repented, and reforged in fire. She had chosen truth when it mattered most, even at the cost of her own ruin. And that, to me, was worth more than blood that sought only to consume me. When I told her, she collapsed into tears, sobbing into her apron as though the weight of a lifetime had suddenly lifted. I don't deserve this, she whispered over and over. Perhaps she didn't. Perhaps none of us ever truly deserve redemption. But it isn't about deserving. It's about choosing again and again the harder path of honesty when deceit would be easier. And she had chosen that. Sitting in my sunlit garden, I thought about the strange symmetry of it all. My fortune had nearly destroyed me, nearly turned my own son into my executioner. Yet in the end, it became the very tool I wielded to draw the lines of justice, to separate what was rotten from what still had a chance to grow. Wealth poisoned by greed must be cleansed, and cleansing is never gentle. It is painful, it is shocking, it is final. But when the poison is gone, what remains can nourish, not destroy. So I left my legacy not to the one who believed he was entitled to it by birth, but to the one who proved, through failure, remorse, and loyalty reclaimed, that trust once shattered can still be rebuilt. To my son, I left nothing but the echo of my final words, spoken in court and carried now like a stone in his chest. Family does not kill family. You lost that name the moment you chose greed over blood. And to Maria I left more than wealth. I left recognition. A statement that loyalty, even when fractured, carries more worth than blood corrupted beyond repair. This was not forgiveness as surrender. It was forgiveness as power. A deliberate choice made not out of naivety but out of wisdom born from pain. In giving her a share of what my son tried to steal, I turned betrayal into something else entirely, a lesson etched into the marrow of my legacy. As I sit here now, listening to the wind rustle through the trees of my garden, I whisper the truth that guides me into the twilight of my life. Blood can betray, loyalty can fail, but redemption, earned honestly, outshines them both. And wealth, when freed from greed, can finally heal.